So, welcome and thank you for investing your time to join the webinar this afternoon. The fact that you are here shows that you are serious about leadership and success. If we have not met, my name is Phil Bajura. One of the things that I love most in life is helping others achieve success through sharing my passion for business, systems, planning and goal setting. We do have a lot to cover today, so take as many notes as you need, and if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. If you haven't already, please open your chat box now. So let's get started. Okay. So a good leader should always, I just want to copy that into the taskbar. So just bear with me for a moment while I bring that up. Okay, so I've just copied a good leader should always. Just type into the chat box and complete that sentence the best way that you see fit. Okay, just a few more people coming in. So we've just got started. I've just typed into the chat box, a good leader should always. So just type that in as to how you see or what you believe a good leader should always be. Finish that sentence any way that you see fit. And don't worry, you're not being graded on your answers. Okay. So before we get into assessing your answers, I'd like to share how James McGregor Burns, a Pulitzer Prize winning leadership expert, historian, presidential biographer, and a political scientist would define leadership. So according to his principles of transformational leadership, aka being an inspirational leader, an effective leader is someone who does the following. Firstly, they create an inspiring vision for the future. They also motivate and inspires the team to engage with that vision. They also manage the delivery of the vision, and they coach and build a team so that it's more effective at achieving the vision for the business. Simplifying this, leadership can be defined as a process of social influence, which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a common goal. Anyone who strives to be a leader should always be changing and improving based on the information they learn and what their followers need from them. The longer that you think like and act as a leader, the more likely it is that you'll change the way you choose to complete the sentence. A good leader should always. So in order to grow as a leader, you first need to know where you stand as that leader. So let's break down the way you answered the question above. We're about to dive into a short survey developed by leadership expert and Professor Bill Torbett. and psychologist Susan Cook-Reuter. It's called the Leadership Development Profile, and it will help you determine which leadership style you uphold based on the action logics that you most agree with. So grab your pen and paper. When you read a statement that you agree with, and I'll copy the statements into the chat box to make it easier for you, write down the letter combination of what you feel you agree with most. So for example, there might be an S1, an A3. At the end, we'll determine what your answers say about you as a leader. I will copy the responses into the chat box so that you can reflect on the statements and write your response if any of the statements has meaning for you. So note, you may not record a response on every leadership category if the statement does not relate to you and or your leadership style. Keep in mind that the categories the statements are organised in don't necessarily relate to the final outcome. So let's get started. An individualist leader is self-aware. They're creative and primarily focused on their own actions as opposed to overall organisational performance. They're exceptionally driven by the desire to exceed personal goals and constantly improve upon their skills. So I'll just copy the responses into the chat box for you. So the responses, or here are some statements that an individualistic leader might agree with. So if any of these statements you can relate with, just record, in this case, the I1, the I2, or the I3. So the statements are, a good leader should always trust their own intuition over established organisational processes. Something else they might say might be, it's important to be able to relate to others so that I can easily communicate complex ideas to them. And then another thing might be, I'm more comfortable with progress than sustained success. So if any of those relate to you as a leader, just record that on your paper. So the strategist. The strategists are extremely aware of the environments in which they operate. They make it a point to gather a deep understanding of the structures and processes that make their business tick, but they're also able to keep perspective, apply critical thinking, and evaluate what could be improved on. So I'll just copy those responses again into the chat box. So if any of these statements relate to your leadership style, please record it down. So here are some things that a strategist might say. A good leader should always be able to build a consensus in divided groups. Another thing they might say is it's important to help develop an organisation as a whole, in addition to the growth of individuals. And thirdly is conflict is inevitable, but I know enough about my team's personal and professional relationships to handle that friction. So again, if any of those statements relate to you as in your style of leadership, just record that down. So the next type of leadership is the alchemist. So what distinguishes alchemists from other action logics is their unique ability to see the big picture in everything. whilst also understanding the need to take details seriously. Under this type of leadership, no department or team member is overlooked. So again, I'll just copy the statements into the chat box. Just bear with me while I do that. All right. So some of the statements that an alchemist leader might agree with would be: a good leader helps their team members reach their highest potential and possesses the necessary empathy and moral awareness to get there. It's important to make a profound and positive impact on whatever I'm working on. Another statement might be: I have a unique ability to balance short-term needs and long-term goals. So if any of those relate to you, just record the digits. The next type of leader that we're going to look at is the opportunist. So opportunists are guided by a certain innate level of mistrust in others and rely on a facade of control to keep their team members in line. These types of people usually believe in the adage of an eye for an eye. So again, I'll copy the statements. Okay, so here are some of the things an opportunist might say is: a good leader should always view others as a potential competition to be bested, even if it's at the expense of their professional development. They might also say, I reserve the right to reject the input of those who question or criticise my ideas. So that's the opportunist. The next type of leader we're going to look at is the diplomat. The diplomat is not concerned with assuming control. Instead, they seek to cause minimal impact by conforming to existing norms and completing their daily tasks with as little friction as possible. So here are some things that a diplomat might say. A good leader should always resist change since it's risking. Sorry, let me start again. A good leader should always resist change since it risks causing instability. They might also say it's important to provide the social glue in team situations safely away from conflict. So if any of those statements relate to you, just copy down the D1 or D2. All right, the next type of leader that we're going to look at is the expert. So the expert is always at the front line of their field and continuously strives to perfect their knowledge and meet their own high expectations. The expert is fantastic as a contributor and source of knowledge, but can usually stand to improve in the field of emotional intelligence. Okay. So I'll just enter those into the chat box. So the statements that the expert might agree with include: a good leader should prioritise their own pursuit of knowledge over the needs of the organisation and their direct reports. They might also agree with: when problem solving with others in the company, my opinion tends to be the correct one. So, all right, let's move on. So, which type of leader are you? Take a look at your notes and compare to the following table. And I'll just copy that into the chat box so that you've got something to refer to. All right. All right, so the democratic relates to the statements that we was speaking about earlier, in particular S3. Autocratic leadership relates to O1, O2, E1 and E2. A laissez-faire leader relates to D2, D3 and E1. Strategic, and so you get the gist of what we're speaking about. So there's the strategic leader, the transformational leader, the transactional leader, and then the bureaucratic leader. The more statements you agree with, the more likely you practice a mix of different leadership styles. So here's how to break it down. If you agreed with everything the strategist said, i.e. that is S1, S2 or S3, this could make you a 66% strategic leader and a 33% democratic leader. If you agreed with just S3, but also everything the alchemist said, this would make you a 50% transformational and 25% strategic and 25% democratic leader. If you'd like to share your results in the chat box, are you surprised by the outcome? So if anybody would like to share their results, just type them in the chat box now. So let's take a look at democratic leadership. For those of you who fell into the category of democratic leadership, you'd be happy to hear that this style is commonly very effective. Most types of leaders make decisions based on the input of each team member. And although the leader makes the final call, each team member has an equal say on a project's direction. So democratic leadership is one of the most effective styles because it allows lower level team members to exercise authority, which gives them more skin in the game and generally makes them more loyal to the company as a whole. Solving an issue under democratic leadership resembles how decisions can be made in company board meetings. A leader gives the team a few decision-related options, or an open discussion is held with each, and either the leader makes a decision based on that input, or the decision is put to a vote. So that defines a democratic leader. Autocratic leadership. Autocratic leadership is the opposite of democratic leadership. Autocratic leadership is rarely effective in the long term. In this leadership style, team members are neither considered nor consulted prior to a direction and are expected to adhere to the decision at a time and place stipulated by the leader. An example of autocratic leadership might be when a manager changes the hours of work shifts for multiple team members without consulting anyone. In today's workplace culture, this type of leadership can't be sustained without losing team members. If you fell under this leadership category, work on being more open to the intellect and perspective of the rest of your team, and you don't have to do this all alone. So the laissez-faire leadership. Who here learned French in high school? If you recall, the French term laissez-faire literally translates to let them do. And can refer to leaders who hand over nearly all authority to their team members. In a young startup business, you might see a laissez-faire company founder who makes no major office policies around work hours or deadlines and puts full trust into their team members, while their own focus is on the big pieces of running the company. Whilst this leadership can be empowering for team members, it can also limit their personal development and overlook critical company growth opportunities. The next type of leader we'll look at is strategic leadership. Strategic leaders sit at the intersection between a company's main operations and its growth opportunities. This type of leader promotes a culture of inquiry, but also accepts traditional burdens in the interest of ensuring consistency and stability for everyone else. Strategic leaders are constantly vigilant, honing their ability to anticipate by scanning the environment for signals of change. They also have a tendency to want to study failures, their own and their teams, and in a constructive way to find the hidden lessons. Their mantra is, what went wrong? What can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? The next style of leadership is transformational leadership. So transformational leaders are always working to improve upon the status quo and push their team to grow and reach outside of their comfort zone. This type of leadership is greatly desired among growth-minded companies because it motivates employees to see what they're capable of. One potential downfall is that transformational leaders can risk losing sight of everyone's individual learning curve, especially if the correct type of coaching and direction isn't provided. The transactional leader. Perhaps one of the most common types of leaders, these managers reward their employees for precisely the work they're expected to do. These types of leaders lean on things like scheduled bonuses and staying within the status quo. Transactional leadership helps establish roles and responsibilities for each team member, but can also encourage team members to stick to doing just the bare minimum. And then finally, we look at the bureaucratic leadership. Other phrases that can help describe this type of leader include traditional or old school. These types of leaders go by the books. They might listen and consider the input of team members, but they tend to reject ideas if they conflict with the company policy or past practices. Team members under this leadership style might not feel as controlled as they would under autocratic leadership, but there is still a lack of freedom in how much people are able to do within their roles. This type of leadership can lead to discouragement and a lack of innovation, something ambitious, growth-orientated companies definitely want to avoid. So regardless of what type of leadership style or styles you might fall into, we know that there are aspects that you should always be trying to improve. And perhaps the most important one is communication. As a leader, you need to be able to clearly and succinctly explain goals, tasks, and everything in between to your team members. This means mastering all forms of communication, including one-on-one, departmental, and team-wide, as well as proper etiquette for communication via phone, email, and social media. A large part of communicating well involves creating an open and steady flow of communication to and from your team and creating an environment of trustworthiness and positive feedback when people do choose to come to you with ideas. A few things that everyone can benefit from working on in terms of communication include reading the body language of those that you're communicating with, reducing ambiguity in both written and spoken language, learning more about active listening and developing an understanding of DISC and how to adapt with how the different DISC styles like to communicate. As a leader, it's your job to inspire your team members to go the extra mile and build their self-esteem along the way. Why? Because it will help them continue to stay loyal to their work and increase their investment in the success of the company. In order to keep your team motivated, show them that you're committed to them by asking for feedback, being open to listening to their concerns, recognizing them in front of the rest of the team, understanding differences in work styles and personalities, and saying thank you for the work that they do. Leading successfully requires an understanding of what people are thinking, not just what they're doing. Leaders need to see and be seen. The C relates to how you gather information needed to understand what is going on within the organisation, and be seen relates to how others get their information about and from you as their leader. As a leader, be more aware of the impressions that you are making. Are you visible to your team, and what are they seeing about your leadership? In today's environment, leading requires a focus on the 3O model. And the 3O model is, and you might want to write this down, is outcomes, others, and ourselves. So focusing on outcomes. Here you will need to lead with the purpose of reaching a desired outcome. Know where you're going. Focusing on others is leading with and through your people. You are more influential when you focus on others. And then finally, the final O is focusing on ourselves. Identify with your own beliefs and assumptions. Who you are and how you lead is important wherever your people work. So practicing our ability to delegate. It's common amongst novice leaders to believe that delegating tasks is a sign of weakness. Please believe it's not. By identifying the skills of your team members and assigning duties to them based on those skills, you're being smart. You're being strategic and resourceful. So use those communication skills to define expectations and explore what each team member might be willing to take on. Be creative in the way that you assign responsibility and ask for feedback about the best way to take on a task. Just because you've been doing something one way doesn't mean that there isn't a second, third, or fourth way that someone else could do the task just as well or even better. Be prepared to be flexible. This trust that you give others to handle larger parts of the business will provide them with a boost of self-esteem and help them to feel more involved. Just be sure that you're encouraging open communication along the way so that no one feels overwhelmed or ill-equipped to complete their tasks. In today's environment of dealing with COVID-19, it is vital that you are being the leader that your team needs right now, no matter what your role is that you have in the business. Your job as the leader in your business is to keep your team focused without fear. They will be naturally concerned and fearful for their jobs, how they will provide for their families. To keep them focused, you will need to reassure them constantly, every day, even several times a day. Keep them informed on how the business is tracking At the end of the day, fear is worse than the actual thing. Your team need to see you leading from the front. The team needs to see you setting the immediate direction for the business. They need to see you communicating with customers, being in front of other people. Give your team something to focus on. More importantly than ever before, now is the time for you to be the leader in your business, and remember, just like the virus, your mindset is infectious. Be mindful of what you are spreading. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join me. I absolutely love getting to chat with you, and I hope that you've learned something valuable about leadership. I also want to add how proud I am of each of you for taking the steps towards becoming a better leader. If you have any further questions about what we've discussed today, please post them in the chat box. Chances are that someone else is wondering the same thing. If you want to continue exploring upon how to improve and hone in on your leadership styles and skills, or anything else, feel free to email me at philbajura@actioncoach.com. Thank you again for helping. I'm here to help.